My name is Rochelle Call, and I'm here with Sgt. Taylor from Provo Police Department, and Angela Croix, right?
Croix,
yes. And we're here to talk about sexual abuse, sexual violence in Utah County, what to do about it. We just want to have that discussion. It's something that comes up so much in my conversations with people just throughout the day, throughout my weeks. You would just be shocked to know the amounts of people that do come and as women we talk and you just hear things and you want to do something about it. So we felt like having a community meeting would be a really good idea so that we could start this synergy in our community with professionals, with agencies, so that we're all on the same page. And that's the reason for this meeting tonight. So I'm going to turn the time over to Sgt. Taylor. He's going to say a little bit about himself, your background, and then Angela, if you do the same thing as well.
Okay.
I'm Brian Taylor. I'm a sergeant at the Provo Police Department. I've been policing for about 13 years. During that time, I've worked as a patrol officer and eventually as a special victims detective. I did that for all of 2009, 10, 11, and 12, and now I supervise the high-speed world of school resource officers in Provo, and I'm a public information person for the department. It's not the pointy end of the spear, but it's great work.
Awesome. Thank you. Angela.
I'm Angela Croix /Brady /Kelly. Let's see, who am I? I've done community work for the last couple of years, and now I've done a lot for Operation Underground Railroad, and I'm now want to start helping in my local community. So.
Yeah, local community, that's really important to all of us because you've got to bloom where you're planted. And this is where we're planted right now. And so we're going to get the conversation. A little bit about myself. I do have history with DCFS, social worker there for a number of years, Wasatch Mental Health as well. So I do have a history with social work. I'm an educator now, so I have switched over, finishing my master's in special education. So I'm in the schools now, which is, again, just social work in a different building, in my opinion. I don't know. So here we go. I've got some questions, and we just want to inform. We're here to inform and to have a conversation and not to point fingers and place blame, because honestly, just talking to Sgt. Taylor in the last 20 minutes, I have gained so much information and knowledge that I'm so glad I didn't go off in this direction, which is how powerful it is to communicate with people and to have that understanding so that we're, again, on the same page. So as far as our Utah County sexual violence issue, which really covers sexual abuse, sexual assault, all those different things. Go ahead and give me your, well, not your bottom line, because it's so dynamic, but what we were talking about, some of those things.
Well, this is a community like many others in the country, where there are decent families. The average people in this community are decent, hardworking, and they go to work, and they love their families, and they respect and take care of them. But we have abuse issues here like we have anywhere. And the message that we want to put out is that there is hope and support and service for anybody who needs it, anybody who will come forward and ask for it. The police department stands ready to provide that support.
And I just want to interrupt. I should have said it a minute ago. I just want to thank Sgt. Taylor for being here. I've been able to work a little bit with Chief King, and I'm grateful for all that Provo Police Department does.
Provo Police Department is awesome.
Yeah, they're awesome.
I worked with them with Wasatch Mental Health. I noticed how kind they were to all of my clients. They didn't run in and just make assumptions, and to me that's good training and knowing what to do and what not to do, and that's what we're hoping to help other people do as far as mandatory reporting, so we'll cover that. But one thing I really want to talk about, which I thought was interesting, I brought a number to Sgt. Taylor tonight basically saying, listen, we've got a certain dynamic here in Utah County where we've got about 6,300 clergy members, if you count bishops and all these different things. And then that's not counting your non-denominational pastors. We have this high level of religiosity here. And then we have these statistics that are terrible for domestic violence, child abuse, child sex abuse, all these different things. And to me, it was just a discrepancy that I'm interested in. And I'm interested in talking about. And the way you were able to flip that for me, which was that should actually be a positive thing. We should be able to manhandle this situation then. If we have that much of a force, we should be able to have a different situation going on right now. So go ahead and expound on that.
Well, what I would say is that police professionals understand that sexual violence is seriously underreported. I think the approximate statistic is that for adults, 1 out of every 10 sexual assaults will be reported. That means 9 of them are not reported. And police responder, an investigator, is trained to respond to any report of sexual violence as a really important opportunity to offer support to a victim and to appropriately document and capture that disclosure in a forensically useful way that makes it possible for us to take that 1 out of 10 chance to do something to interdict an offender. If you understand that that offender is very likely to continue reoffending, well, every time somebody comes to you and says, hey, this terrible thing happened to me, I have a moral duty to stop and be supportive to that person. But that's also an opportunity for me to put that person in prison who did that thing, all right? And those are not identical objectives, but they're not contradictory either. And police professionals are trained to think, well, this is an important disclosure. What can I do to capture this, offer support to this victim who really, really needs it, and make a reasonable, vigorous investigation that results in a prosecution and a conviction. And conviction stops sex abuse. All right? I'm not telling you that it's 100% stop, but we take somebody off the street, we put them in prison, they get an immediate intervention.
That's right. Yes. So why the numbers?
Well, those are national numbers. The 1 in 10, that's not a Utah County number.
Right, but it's just, right. So is that the mandatory reporting? Is that where we need to come and fill in?
Well, you asked a
citizens,
question
or?
about the local clergy structure in this community. What I would say to those people is, I salute you for the great work you do in support of the communities that depend on you. And I recognize that those people are not police officers. They're not clinicians. They're not social workers. They're not doctors, by and large. They're a lay clergy. So I would urge them to think the same way and think every time someone comes to you and says, this thing happens to me, think to yourselves, what's the first thing I can do to support this person? And I would suggest the first thing you can do is start by believing. You just look at that person in the eye and you say, I'm sorry this happened to you. I'm sorry that happened to you. What can I do to help you? Tell me what we can do. That's enormously validating for someone who just went through something awful. And then help that person feel safe and secure enough to make a disclosure to a competent investigative authority, local police, the Division of Child and Family Services, somebody.
So, yeah, so bishops, clergy doing that as well as the mandatory reporting, just a citizen. You would probably say do the same thing, have that same mindset. It's about the mindset, really.
That's right.
Okay.
Everybody should know we are all mandatory reporters. The state code is very clear. It says any person who has reason to think that a child is being abused shall immediately report to the nearest police officer or the Division of Child and Family Services. That includes everybody.
Can we talk about what that looks like after? What does that look like?
Well, I work in a school environment. A child will trust their teacher enough to say something. And that teacher will immediately call an administrator or a school resource officer. And that school, I work in a school, they will come to me and they will say, this happened, I will stop what I'm doing and I will document that. I will call my partners at DCFS and we will do parallel investigations to stabilize somebody's welfare and to provide an appropriate investigation. So if you hear a child say, I got hurt last night, somebody kicked me, somebody touched me where I shouldn't have been touched. Or that's not the way children talk. They say vague things, all right? Something happened that didn't make me feel good. Somebody touched me on my private parts. Something happened with my brother that's never happened before. Those are the kinds of things that children say.
So watch for specific disclosures as opposed to general. If a child is saying something more specific than general, that would raise a red flag possibly?
Human behavior is too complex for me to
It
narrow it down
is.
that way. But you should just be open and you should say, okay, my general rule is when someone comes to me and I get the feeling they're going to disclose something, you should just turn on your best listening ears and be supportive and say, tell me more about that. Don't lead that person and say, are you sure he touched you there? Or maybe he touched you here? Are you sure it was this? Maybe don't lead that person.
Right.
But listen and be encouraging. And then report it. Report it to the police, report it to DCFS. That doesn't mean that we're crossing important thresholds and taking people's children away and immediately jumping to conclusions. It doesn't mean that at all. Yeah. It means we're starting a reasonable investigation to check on people's child welfare, and we investigate according to standards before we move on to those important milestone events and investigations.
That's great. Any idea? Thoughts?
What if someone hears about abuse that's not direct? What if you...
If you hear about a third person,
Third party.
if you have reason to believe that a child is being abused, you must report. All right? That's what it says. It doesn't say they have to disclose to you personally.
Oh, okay.
All right? So maybe you're having a dinner party, and you overhear a couple of your guests talking about, I know this happened at the neighbor's house, but I don't know that I can call the police. He's got a job, and if we call the police, he'll lose his job, and I don't want that on my conscience. Well, what else don't you want on your conscience?
That's
Continuing abuse
That's right.
against a child? Call and let the professionals sort that out. Think about it in an organized way, and investigate to a standard.
That's really good information. And I think it's information that, for whatever reason, that silence that you were talking about, that tends to happen. What did you say? A perpetrator or an abuser can create this fear, and use your words because they were so great.
This is not me talking. These are well understood dynamics of victimology and victim behavior, but a sex offender will use whatever means that he has at his disposal to control the behavior of a victim. And if that victim is a juvenile, that offender will, in order to gain sexual access to that person, he will say, I will kill you if you tell anybody. No one will believe you if you tell anybody. Your parents will be so ashamed if they find out what you did. You will be so embarrassed. I will put this on Facebook. And there's just 100 different permutations of that kind of manipulation. All of that is designed to allow an offender to get access and to delay or prevent a disclosure by that child. And that puts that child in a terrible, terrible bind where they are not only exploited, physically exploited in the moment, but where they are continuously trapped in a little private cell of suffering for a long time afterwards, where they cannot go out and get appropriate help because they're terrified of getting help. Well, help is available, and it's a heartbreak to think that there are children in any place. But they are in every place. And they are suffering in silence because they have been groomed and conditioned not to report. So when a child comes to you and says something happened, whoever you are, you should stop, listen, be supportive, start by believing, document what you heard, make a report.
I have a question. So I'll disclose something that I wasn't even planning on disclosing, and that is that I'm a victim of sexual abuse. So what What if, and so I know the mindset of a child that can't talk, that doesn't want to tell,
Communicate,
because that was me. But so now, me as an adult, what if I don't have any, what if I think because of outside, can't put it into words because now I'm stressed out because of what I'm talking about. What if I have reason to believe that a child is it bad to ask any questions at all? As far as I'm talking about, like the mental health of the child, because I know what I thought as a child, I every day wanted someone to ask me.
Well,
So, but does that mess
it's
up a
okay
child?
it's okay to return the language that you received, and someone says, somebody touched me in this part of my body. It's okay to say that back. Where did they touch you on your body? It's probably a very bad idea to exceed what that child has said.
Right, exactly.
When I said forensically useful a minute ago, we have to, sex assault investigators have to document where that first disclosure happened, and they have to figure out who else that person told, and they're looking for consistency, and they're trying to figure out if this child is the recipient of continuing pressure from an abuser, and it's very hard, and the younger the child gets, the harder it gets. But the moment you have a concern, I would just tell you, you should just listen, be supportive, write down what you hear, and then make an immediate report. The police or the Division of Child and Family Services. We all want to, by the way, that includes me. I don't, even though I have been the special victims detective, I'm not that now. And so I respect that, and I do exactly what I'm telling you to do. I listen and I document everything that they are saying, and then I turn it over to the right person. If we try and get ahead of that process,
I don't want to be that person.
You can end up leading that child and coloring the disclosure. And
What does that mean exactly?
it means that we're suggesting answers to a victim that they might not have said themselves. And then if we get into a court situation, it makes prosecution very difficult when attorneys figure out that that child isn't talking about something that actually happened, but they're talking about a conversation that they had with somebody. All right? You understand what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying. I do.
There's a big difference.
At the same time, maybe a child doesn't know how to put it into words.
Well, that's what we have. We have a great children's justice center here where professionals at DCFS and at the Utah County Children's Justice Center and forensically trained detectives go and interview children according to a forensic protocol so that they can certify in court that they didn't ask leading questions, that they introduced topics according to a research-based method that produces good disclosures. So it's a very careful bit of training and process that they go through to support these interviews. You don't want to be that person.
No, I don't want to be that person.
So deliver, basically get it to the right people. And the mandatory reporting it's not really effective or in effect until it's crossed the threshold of DCFS, the police department, local police department. Can they go to CJC or Children's Justice Center right off the bat?
The Children's Justice Center just exists to facilitate those interviews and some follow-up therapies that are offered to victims and families. They're not investigators.
Okay.
If you went there, they would say, thank you for coming here. Let me have you sit in this room while I call DCFS
Wait
or
for
the
just a
police.
second. Yeah,
Right.
okay, good to know. So
Yeah.
two agencies.
They're
in your
great, they're
community.
wonderful, and they are absolute partners in the
Yep.
campaign for children's justice.
Yep.
But they're not the investigators. They facilitate learning, they do forensic medical exams,
Okay.
and they have wonderful support groups for families and children of child victims.
That's awesome. That's such good
They're just
information.
about the best people in the world, is what
Yeah,
I'm
and I
trying to
agree,
say.
because I know a lot of them, they're great people. One other thing, who's responsible for the prevention of abuse?
Well, if you call the police and ask them to give a public safety presentation and say, what can we do to stop bicycle theft? The police are going to tell you to put a lock on your bike. And what can we do to stop auto burglary? They're going to tell you not to leave valuables in your car. The problem is, if I come in and I start talking about prevention for sexual assault, it's improper for me to put it on victims. Responsibility for prevention of sexual abuse belongs with abusers. People who commit sexual abuse against children, people who sexually abuse and rape women, those people are responsible for stopping
I
it.
like you even more.
I
than
know,
you
right?
did.
Because I'm like, woo!
I already liked you a lot.
They,
Right.
they,
I know, right?
they're
That's
just
a-
outside the bounds. They need to stop. And I'm willing to understand that group of people need help, all right? But the first thing they need to do is realize that everybody else in society figured out a safe, socially approved method for meeting their biological needs, and they can too with help.
That's actually a really good statement, because it's not that you're shaming people into conforming. It's sort of like, well, look around. Is anyone else doing that? They're not. And I say that to my 7-year-old. What is everyone else doing? You know, just kind of fit in if you can. But I think to say that is perfectly acceptable.
Yeah, we
and
have,
caring actually to
you
the
know,
individual.
We are still a society with limits, and that's one of them. And we
Yeah.
don't apologize for that.
Yeah.
I know we have a lot of, it's an age of unprecedented individual liberty,
Yeah.
but that doesn't extend to anybody's body but your own without clear consent.
That's great. Great. Boy, that's a soundbite. That's a clip.
Yeah.
All on its own. Okay, and then we talked about victim advocacy, and talked to me about treatment and recovery for people who have been through all this and who are going through it. I know I'm a survivor of domestic violence, and I spoke at an event about a year ago, and they wanted my bio before I came, and I just kept thinking, I'm not a survivor. I did everything while surviving. It's not one or the other. You're living life. This is all happening. And to try and paint it as though there's this magic point where it all stops, it's just this ongoing getting better process. And so talk to me about that, because we have families who have ongoing abuse right now, and they're trying to get in recovery. They have perpetrators in the home right now trying to get in recovery. What would that look like?
Well, I think as a police person in the blue polyester suit, I need to be really cautious about my limits. And it would be an overstatement to say that the police are going to step in and return everything to the way it was the day before this thing happened.
Yeah.
That's not
happens.
it's not what happens. All right. So the police can come in and stabilize something that's happening right now, and then they can sort out offenders from victims and apply reasonable investigative steps and make referrals and all of that good stuff. But that leaves someone who was traumatized, and sometimes in some of these categories of crime that we're discussing tonight, severely traumatized, in need of support. And police officers are not trained to do that over the long haul. That officer who helped you last night might have given great service, but tomorrow night he's helping somebody else. So we have at the department where I work, a really excellent team of trained victim advocates who are trained and assigned to offer support to victims of domestic violence, sexual abuse, child abuse, and they offer appropriate referrals for therapeutic intervention. They offer really solid support during court processes. For a domestic violence victim, the court system can be really daunting, and if that victim's voice is not heard in the process, the court system can notionally punish an offender, but if that victim is the one who has a job, maybe she's the one who ends up paying the fine. She was victimized, and the husband goes to jail, and now she's out of income, and she's paying the fine, and a skilled victim advocate can step in and help the court understand what interventions are appropriate. And that's not to say that it's a perfect system, because it's not. We have a system that's heavily weighted to providing a high degree of protection for the accused, and that's our constitutional system, and we work within it. And it has limitations.
Which is what? Innocent?
Yeah, everyone is presumed innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah.
It's a heavy lift, all right?
Yeah.
And I'm not criticizing that. That's a good thing. That provides a stable system where
people like me in uniform are not unduly interfering with people's rights until certain thresholds of evidence are met. You wouldn't want to live in a culture where police could just put people in steel cages for suspicion of crime.
Well, maybe. I'm totally kidding. Don't put that. Maybe just for a little bit. Yeah, I think that there's.
We're serious about people's rights,
Yeah.
but we're also serious about providing good service to victims of crime.
Yeah.
And our victim advocates are the ones who really make that possible.
Okay, so we need more, we need to steer people towards victim advocates.
That's right.
And also say that if you are in the system, if you are in a situation right now where there is abuse going on, stability and get it to stop. Whatever's happening right now, it's just focus on stopping and getting stability. And that you can be a intervention for getting that to stop, but the stability needs to come from a different support network, clearly.
Well, it takes a ton of courage for a victim of domestic violence to make a report, ask for help. They're commonly dependent on the person who is abusing them.
Yes.
And so there's a really difficult cycle that they're caught in. And victims of domestic violence will go through that cycle many times on average before they will make a report and decide to do something concrete to change their living situation. And I'm not saying that everybody who's a victim of domestic violence should separate from the person that they loved and married. Many people go through it and they learn, they go to classes and training, and they don't do it again. But a lot of women end up getting killed for lack of appropriate intervention.
Well, and let me say, since I can say this at this point, when I went through my divorce, I had to go, by law, you have to go through this Utah County, whatever that is, to divorce, you have to go through a class. And in the class, I remember being told or taught that you want to keep a good proximity to the father, to make sure that, you know, everything's good with the kids. And I took
Does
that.
that presume a healthy kind of
Well,
divorce?
so what I
whatever that
realized is everything is presuming this healthy dynamic in the relationship. And they didn't even say in that Utah County court thing that I went to, they didn't even say, unless you're a victim of domestic violence, that's a whole different bear. That can be deadly. So for me, I ended up, wanting to be close and make sure my kids, and then that turned it into such a mess that I ended up having to, leave overnight and leave the state, and it became so bad. But in my mind, I was just trying to be obedient because that's what I learned to do to stay safe. Because as long as I'm just doing what I can and not, get out of the bounds. But the law that I was hearing was saying, stay close. Again, not assuming that they're talking to domestic violence victims in the audience. That needs to change. I don't know how, but we could work on it. But it's a problem. We need to have a separation of, you're not this. If you're in this situation, we're not talking to you. You're in a whole different ballgame here. You're in danger, and you shouldn't be anywhere near that person. And we need to figure out how to protect people because, women will do whatever they can to protect their kids. And it might look weird, but ultimately you're just trying to keep people safe. And I was doing back bends and you name it. I was just trying to keep everyone safe and doing whatever people told me to do. And it turned out to not be very good for me at all.
Well,
so again, one of those other things we can
congratulations
talk
on getting
about.
free.
It's been 5.5 years, but again, I left probably 8-9 times. I changed, I moved.
That's typical.
I moved, my kids will say that they moved maybe 18 times over the course of their lifetime. My oldest is 19, and that's embarrassing for me, but I'm kind of like, I was always trying to get away. I didn't know why or from what, but that's what I was doing. And I had to learn to stop doing that and at some point get some stability and stop and, get a household together. But I was so used to just trying to get away and trying to, look, it was just PTSD all over the place. And I don't think I'm the only one. I think there's a lot of women like me that possibly are experiencing this on a low level, and it needs to be discussed. So again, and the sexual abuse, it's all part of the same, just this abuse dynamic and the fear and like what you were saying with that silence. It's from the abusers that are putting that out. Is that accurate, or?
Abuse will take every good thing about a person's character and it will distort it. Yeah. And I learned that from some of the really great professionals who have supported some of the victims in my cases, but someone will be positive and outgoing, and then an abuser will come along and exploit that, and that victim will just withdraw that part of their personality because they will think, oh, I did something to cause that. If only I hadn't done this, he wouldn't have done that. No, that's not right. He did that because he misunderstood what his boundaries were, and he exploited your boundaries. That's his.
It wasn't about you.
It wasn't about you. It was about him.
And the outgoing nature of that person is needed for them to actually be functional.
Right.
And when you just take that part of you that could save your life and you bury it and you become silent and you shut down, that's when you get into real trouble.
Sure.
So.
And so, I just really salute these counselors who work with these women, but they take them and they just go through this exhaustive therapy process with these women, and they help them examine what happened and put it in perspective and find the value that they had last week, last year, and say, that's who you are. And you can be that person with some support.
That's awesome. Well,
Maybe there's questions?
Yeah,
Are
questions,
there
anyone?
questions in the
Yeah.
audience?
yeah.
When we talk about perpetrators, is it usually someone the child doesn't know?
The question is, who are perpetrators, and are they usually someone that the victim doesn't know? That's a great question because it gets to the myth of sexual abuse, which is that sexual abuse is committed by the stranger hiding in the bushes, who's going to jump out and grab you on your way home from school or while you're out jogging on the river trail. And those things happen, and I've investigated both of those things. But that is the vast minority of cases. Sexual abuse of children, sexual assault, rape, those things are overwhelmingly committed by someone that you know and by someone that you trust. Someone has exploited that trust for the purpose of gaining access to you. And so the truth is that someone in your family or extended family or your sphere of friends who has just exploited that access.
Do you have a question?
Me?
Yeah.
What if this is like a consistent thing that's happening with an uncle who has done things to multiple nieces, but they were so young at the time, like parents were saying that didn't happen, you're lying, and
Yeah.
then some of them were so scared they didn't come out until after they were married and moved out of state, and still to this day, they are afraid to come forward because they are fear of what this man
Yeah.
can do to them.
Yep, that is I hear the pain in the question, and I appreciate the question, and I wish that I had a really great answer, but I've dealt with these cases before where a child has disclosed something, and then you'll get that one child into an interview setting, and that person will say, this happened to me, and this happened, and it happened to my sister, and it happened to my brother, and families will go into a protective lockdown mode, and there will be some denial, and no, that's not happening, stop talking to our kids, that didn't happen. And I've seen that. I've seen abuse perpetuated for lack of victim cooperation. And lack of victim cooperation happens when children are young and they can't talk, or they're unwilling to talk, or young adults don't want to talk, or people are not prepared to talk.
Or the family lockdown.
Yeah, or the family lockdown mode. And I've seen cases where that happens and the family goes into isolation and they shut off police access, and police never reach a threshold where they can say, we've got probable cause to make an arrest and a referral. And so the case dies and the victim and the abuse continues.
How do you wake the case back up?
Yeah, in the cases that I'm familiar with, something happens. They had an interaction with the police. They went into protective mode, but they learned something. And then when the abuse continues, they think, this got to stop. And the sad thing is, it's good when somebody comes in and says, we're ready to talk now. But in the meantime, there's been years of perpetuating abuse. Yeah. So I would say to any family in that situation, what do you really want for your children? I know the people in the situation that I'm thinking about, they love their children. They want the best for them. They were afraid to do reasonable things.
Does that mean they really wanted the best for them? I'm not
It means
trying to be mean to you.
it means they were just they were not appropriately processing, in my opinion. And so information matters. They got information, and they had an interaction with the police. They went home, and in this case, 2 years later, they came back after that lesson had percolated for a while, and they said, we're ready, and things happened. I would rather that people took a lesson from events like this one tonight, and they realized that the police are going to be supportive and respectful, but they're going to investigate according to some reasonable standards, gather evidence where they can, and they're going to connect people with resources while they do it, because we want for your children what you want. We want them to be safe, happy, healthy members of a really great community. And this is a great community.
It
I have
is.
can I interrupt just while I'm thinking? So, and maybe we already hit on this, and maybe my brain is just going in so many different directions that I forgot. But so let's say it goes to the level of there is abuse, okay? So it's confirmed. So then what does that look like to the family? It's the father. Let's just pretend it's the father. Is the father taken out of the home? Does he go to jail? Because
If we're talking about sexual abuse,
Yes,
police don't say things like abuse is confirmed. We have standards that are explained in constitutional law and case law. And the Fourth Amendment says that we don't commit searches and seizures on people except based upon probable cause. And an arrest is a seizure. And so before I put handcuffs on somebody, I have to have probable cause to do that, right? So someone will come and they will give me an allegation or a disclosure related to abuse, and I will begin investigating, and I will look at the whole body of evidence, and I will say, I've got a disclosure that makes me reasonably suspicious. That's a reasonable basis to start an investigation. What do I have to have before I can get from reasonable suspicion to probable cause? Maybe the answer is some kind of independent confirmation or some evidence, biological evidence, video evidence.
so it can't just be the person's word?
Well, it may be, if that is sufficiently compelling and detailed. Commonly, though, it requires some other element. And so I have to investigate carefully. And investigators, and let me just tell you right now, I'm not going to tell you every tool in the investigator's
toolkit. Well, just give me one
toolkit.
example. Yeah, just one example.
Well, they'll do an interview with the suspect, and they will confront that suspect. All right, and so they will do an interrogation. Right? People have rights.
Right.
Interrogations are conducted according to law,
Yeah.
but we will interrogate and we'll see.
Because I think people are afraid, because obviously people aren't talking for a reason, and probably a lot of it is because they don't know what's going to happen. Is my family going to be completely torn apart? Is the uncle or the father, whoever's committing the abuse, going to be taken to jail? Then there's no income from that person, and the person never sees their father. You know what I mean? Like there's
Those
a
are
fear.
all real fears.
Right.
Yeah.
So
And I can't minimize those fears.
Yep.
And I can't say that they're not legitimate. So I have to respect that victims are coming from a real place of vulnerability, a kind of vulnerability that is imposed on them by the abuse, but also just by the nature of investigation in the criminal justice system. If I take dad out of the house and he's the breadwinner,
right.
that's a hole that we've created in that family structure.
Yes, that's true.
And I don't have a handy answer to that.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question, or did I just answer the question that I
Yes.
wish you
You
asked?
did, but I do have a question, because I was in DCFS, worked with DCFS and stuff like that with my child. And question. When a father is not necessarily sexually abusive, but abusive in lots of other terms, as in not feeding them, leaving them in the car, or abusing them
Neglect.
physically, or locking them in the door, or spanking them, like,
Right.
but why, when they're going through DCFS, do they allow the father to continually have access with them when the child has severe PTSD, has broken collarbone, I don't know what's going
Yeah.
on. But they allow them to see them continually, and then once they go and they're past DCFS, they're allowed to have,
Was there a conviction for physical abuse somewhere in that process?
yes, there was.
The answer is the law makes taking children away from parents, that's an extremely heavy lift under the law. All right, the state is very reluctant to terminate anybody's parental rights except under the most extreme circumstances. And so that's a matter for you to take up with the legislature.
But the courts seem to not do too much about it. It's kind of like, well, he went through the process of anger management, domestic violence.
Those are all the intermediate kinds of things that the courts try to do because they're not allowed to take children away except under the most extreme circumstances. And that's a discussion that the legislature had in the state. I think that law was recalibrated maybe 9 or 10 years ago. It comes up every now and then.
So it's sort of like what we're talking about with this Utah County thing when I went and they said, do this, as far as a divorce situation, but they weren't talking about domestic violence. It sounds like the legislature is not, whatever standard they've set for most extreme, the bar might
Maybe
need to
it
go
needs to-
higher. Because we have a society where things are just up-leveling. We've got a higher rate of all this stuff happening. So for us to rely on this law or this baseline, this standard that's been created back in, 1980, whatever that was, things have changed. And so we need to get either a standard that is shifting to reflect what's actually occurring right now with all the numbers and all the overwhelm. It is changing. And you're right, it is legislature, but that's one of those long, drawn out processes, and maybe someone doesn't survive the wait.
Do you know the problem, as I see it, is that we're really good at changing what we do after a crisis.
Yes. So we
I
wait till someone's
was a
really
case
hurt.
officer on a really terrible sexual assault that happened on the river trail in 2010, and there was an issue about whether we could compel the suspect in that rape incident to submit to STD testing, screening, so that the victim could have some assurance that she wasn't exposed to STDs. And that suspect was denying consent for STD testing. And so with the support of the Provo victim advocate, and that victim is just one of the most amazing humans I've ever met. They lobbied the legislature for change, and they got the law amended to allow that kind of testing without a suspect's consent. So change can happen when the legislature is helped to understand what's happening in your community. They're very responsive if you will talk to them. So this is your community, it's
Yes.
Utah.
Yes. We can make a change.
You can make a change.
Yes.
Get to know your legislator. Call that person.
Okay.
Let them know how the system worked for you or how it didn't work for you. Ask them why it is the way it is. My experience is those people are pretty responsive when you understand that they work within a system and a schedule, and there's a time of the year where they're probably not equipped to do it this year.
Yeah.
But if you get in at the right time of the schedule and help them understand what's going on, they're decent people doing their best.
Wow, thank you. That's really great information. Any other questions, or maybe we'll wrap it up, and final thoughts, final words?
Yeah, my final thought is this. I would say be helpful to people. Listen to people. Be aware of what's going on in your community. When someone needs help, offer it. When someone needs a referral for services, offer it. When someone has a disclosure to make, safeguard that, listen to it, and be sensitive that the people around you, when they are acting out and they're cutting you off on the road, they're probably going through something worse than you are. Be gracious.
Thank you so much. That was just so eloquent and well said. And I would second that
Yeah.
because that's about all that needs to be said for me. What about you?
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you very
All right,
much.
thank you for your attention to
Thank
this
you
issue.
so
It's wonderful.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you. I got the language. Bye.